Prabhupada. Cham Vishnupat Param Svaraj Gacharya Shtottara Shatta Svayankresa Pacharinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantarachima Bhagavatam Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Nitya Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna, today we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10, Text 29. Aditsurannapananam, Aditsurannapananam, Asan Kukshyantranaadayaha, Asan Kukshyantranaadayaha, Natya Samudrash Chatayas, Natya Samudrash Chatayas, Tushti Pushtistadashraye, Tushti Pushtistadashraye, Aditsurannapananam, Aditsurannapananam, Asan Kukshyantranaadayaha, Asan Kukshyantranaadayaha, Nadyas Samudrash Chatayas, Nadyas Samudrash Chatayas, Tushti Pushtis Tadashraye, Tushti Pushtis Tadashraye, Aditsurannapananam, Aditsurannapananam, Asan Kukshyantranaadayaha, Asan Kukshyantranaadayaha, Nadyas Samudrash Chatayas, Nadyas Samudrash Chatayas, Tushti Pushtistadashraye, Tushti Pushtistadashraye. Aditsuho, desiring to have, Annapananam, of food and drink. Asan, there became, Kukshi, the abdomen, Antra, the intestines, Nadayaha, and the arteries, Nadyaha, the rivers, Samudraha, seas, Cha, also Tayoho, of them, Tushtihi, sustenance, Pushtihi, metabolism, Tat, of them, Ashraye, the source. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhayacharan, the Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. When there was a desire to have food and drink, the abdomen and the intestines and also the arteries became manifested. The rivers and seas are the source of their sustenance and metabolism. Purport. The controlling deities of the intestines are the rivers, and those of the arteries, the seas. Fulfillment of the belly with food and drink is the cause of sustenance, and the metabolism of the food and drink replaces the waste of the bodily energies. Therefore, the body's health is dependent on healthy actions of the intestines and the arteries. The rivers and the seas, being the controlling deities of the two, keep the intestines and the arteries in healthy order. Om Jnanatimrandasya Gananchana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasme Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manabhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamaryam Darate Svaparantikam Vandiham Shri Guru Shri Uttapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakshachatam Sahaganaragunatan Vitam Tam Sachivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parichana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastate Tapta Kanchana Gauranga Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutedevi Pranamami Hare Priya Vanchakalpadarabhashya Kripa Sindhyabhavacha Patitanam Pavanebhya Vaishnavebhya Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So I think we'll go to the next verse because it's a very short purport. Yep, and then we'll start the discussion. So text 30. Niritya sorat mamayam hridayam niravidyata tato manaschandra iti sankalpa kama evacha. Translation. When there was a desire to think about the activities of his own energy, then the heart, the seat of the mind, the moon, determination and all desire became manifested. Purport. The heart of every living entity is the seat of the Supersoul, Paramatma, a plenary expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Without his presence, the living entity cannot get into the working energy according to his past deeds. The living entities who are conditioned in the material world are manifested in the creation in terms of respective inclinations inherent in them, and the requisite material body is offered to each and every one of them by the material energy under the direction of the Supersoul. This is explained in the Bhagavad Gita 9.10. When therefore the Supersoul is situated in the heart of the conditioned soul, the requisite mind is manifested in the conditioned soul, and he becomes conscious of his occupation as one is conscious of his duty after waking up from slumber. Therefore, the material mind of the living entity develops when the Supersoul sits on his heart, after which the mind, the controlling deity, the moon, and then the activities of the mind, namely thinking, feeling and willing, all take place. The activities of the mind cannot begin without the manifestation of the heart, and the heart becomes manifested when the Lord wants to see the activities of the material creation. Okay, so we are still continuing discussing in this 10th chapter called Bhagavatam, the answer to all questions, which is called like that because it starts off with the first verse, as we mentioned before. Atra Sarga Visargascha, before mentioning all the 10 topics of the Mahapurana, of which the supreme one is Srimad Bhagavatam, and then after we briefly went through those, then now in the last series of verses we heard about how the Sarga, the creation, can be conceived of as in terms of conceiving of the universe manifesting from the universal form, from the Lord's Virat Rupa, in order to make it very clear to us that everything depends on a person, namely on the Supreme Person, on the Lord. And so in that way we heard how all the different senses were manifested, and all of them due to the desire of the Lord. When the Lord desired to see, then the sun and the eyes and the controlling deity of that manifested. Same with when the Lord desired to move, when the Lord desired, even like yesterday last two verses we heard, even when he desired to evacuate the refuse of eatables, the evacuating whole anus and the sensor organ thereof developed, along with the controlling deity Mitra. So sounds a bit funny, of course, that you think, well, why would the Lord have such a desire? But the point is, we know the Lord himself in his personal transcendental form, he doesn't have to do any of such material activities, he simply enjoys his leelas eternally. And he doesn't have a material body, like having to evacuate the refuse of eatables. That's only necessary for material bodies. But the point is to show us, discuss his universal form, this representation in the material world of conceiving of it as being the form of the Supreme Lord, to, as I said, help get this point into us that even though, because otherwise we so easily get bewildered seeing material nature being so wonderful also by itself, and so overwhelming for the living entity. Like Isvaresvara Dasa yesterday, he mentioned again about, like, even especially now with the COVID now being like almost like a year around harassing us. It's, again and again, material nature actually shows how it is like we as tiny living entities, we can't do anything really. We try to lord over so much, but actually at the end of the day, material nature also is more powerful than us. And although it is inferior energy, as we know, but if we surrender to the Lord, then we don't get affected by it. But otherwise, the conditioned soul, doesn't stand any chance against material nature. Also, a few days ago, there was like a heavy thunderstorm, and as I was, had to remember, because it was warm before, so the doors for Tulsi Marani for the house were left. I had kept open, like covered, but so that the air nicely, she gets the aeration. So I remember, now with this storm, I have to run down and close it. And so as I did, and when ran out there, it was like really intense, like heavy. It can't rain more than that, and thundering and lightning. So as I was doing that, it felt quite scary. Even though, of course, I told myself, hey, I'm supposed to be a devotee, so I shouldn't be scared of these material things. If lightning hits me and I fall down dead in this material body, then so it shall be. Especially fortunate to leave the body here on the grounds of Sri Sri Radha Gopinath's temple. But still, being a neophyte, it felt actually quite intimidating. And that is actually what shows how, because in those moments we feel like so helplessly dependent on the mercy of material nature, of whether it will harm us or not. And so that's actually in those moments, like every conditioned soul even naturally does feel not independent, as we falsely try to be all the time, but actually dependent on something higher than what we are. That definitely there exists some higher power than what we tiny living entities have. And so so the point being that sorry, I forgot kind of how I connected that. But the main point again was like what we discussed yesterday, Prabhu, about this, like Prabhupada in this amazing, like just one sentence purport to text 27 about the evacuation organ. Prabhupada is saying that even in the matter of evacuating stool, the refuse is controlled. So how can the living entity claim to be independent? So that's like the main point of this whole discussion, of showing us that no, even in material life, material senses, all, like every single part of our body, it is not independent. It is ultimately dependent on the Lord. And otherwise, also as we hear each time that when the sense organ is and the sense object is manifested, also along with that is always a controlling deity, a demigod. So, which means that we as small conditioned souls, like meaning material, not being in the position of demigods, of the controlling deities of the senses, that we are in every movement of our body, in everything which is happening in our body, that we are first dependent on that demigod who is controlling that. And and there are many other factors, of course. And of course, as we know, like this whole discussion is about also coming from the understanding of Adhyatmik, Adibhautik and Adidaivik, and so that that the again lost the demigods, and so with the understanding that the self, the Adhyatmik, is always depending on the that was the point I wanted to make, on the Adidaivik, namely the controlling deity of that sense. And Adidaivik, Prabhupada explains, and some other Prabhupada about those three also, that Adidaivik means that they themselves know themselves as servant of the Lord. It shows, of course, immediately that they are dependent on the Lord, so ultimately we are dependent on the Supreme Lord. And and then the second text yesterday was about when the Lord desired to move from one body to another, the navel and the air of departure and death were compoundedly created. So, which and Prabhupada described there about that. That it's interesting that the navel not only is at birth essential, that's how we were connected all the while in the womb to the mother, getting nourishment, and then at birth that it's separated from the body. But that also that is, as it's described in that verse, when we leave the body, that it is also the navel which where the living entity is leaving. And so in today's in text 29, we read that when there was a desire to have food and drink, the abdomen and the intestines and also the arteries became manifested. The rivers and seas are the source of their sustenance and metabolism. So, it's relatively short, Prabhupada, for that one, but it's also interesting. Prabhupada mentions that a few times actually, that according to Ayurveda, because with that understanding, that's also Ayurveda understands that. And that's why, because it is advised when you have a problem with your digestion, that you bathe in the sea. Whereas if you have a problem with the nervous system, then you should go into a flowing river, because those are actually the controlling deities of that process. The sea for metabolism and sustenance, and rivers, or rather, for metabolism, and the rivers for sustenance by, we know the arteries and all the flowing systems in our body, that they, distribute everything from the abdomen, from the intestine. So, which again shows even that's simple knowledge that in Vedic system that people had, and that they took advantage of being aware, okay, this part of my body is controlled by that deity, and if I approach that, then it will help. Whereas, nowadays, because people don't have knowledge of those things, even material life is so much more difficult and struggle. Even on that level, what to speak of that actually only if human society, only if we perform yajna, then the demigods at least are pleased, and if we don't perform it for the pleasure of Vishnu, then does he provide nicely our material necessities. So what to speak of that? But even on the immediate level of our body, like here, the knowledge is unfortunately not used. And then in text 30, we heard that when there was a desire to think about the activities of his own energy, then the heart, the seat of the mind, the moon, determination, and all desire became manifested. So, and Prabhupada discusses there the Paramatma, that the point that, ultimately all those other things that we heard so far is depending on the immediate level on different demigods of controlling deities of the senses, but that here, above all of them, of course, is the Paramatma, is our immediate dependence, also in material life, on the Supersoul. To even, as Prabhupada mentions here also, that only through his presence are we able to know what we desired, like in this life, in our previous life, like what we actually up to, what we want to, how we want to lord over the material nature at this point, and that's then how we engage in the fruitive activities. Because we're so small, and we don't even have the capacity to remember from our past life, but also it wouldn't. it wouldn't really give us the full facility for using, or rather in that case, misusing our free will to lord over material nature if we actually would remember our previous lives, because then it would be very hard to remembering all those failures and how we were beaten up by material nature, and like in what that we were in all those different bodies and all of that, then we wouldn't perhaps we wouldn't want to continue like that. But because we still have the desire, so then the Lord facilitates, and so we forget, but then just He reminds us as the Super Soul just of what we need in order to still further pursue our material desires. Which sounds, of course, a bit like, so the Lord looks like He's a bit kind of a sadist, that even though He knows we can only be really happy if we're with Him in the spiritual world, He facilitates so perfectly our struggle in the material nature to stay stuck here. But we know actually it's not like that. Even though He does facilitate our free will, still at the same time He's always, as the Super Soul, there with us and always looking for opportunities to guide us how to get out of that. And we know it's the example is many times given, but also that actually it's Super Soul is kind of like a father or rather, like from our side, our relationship with Him is such that we have decided to completely forget about Him, to leave home and live our own life, to show zero gratitude for that actually He raised us and provided everything to us, and just want to do our own thing. And but still, and thus, the Father is helpless in the sense that He can't. We don't allow Him or to interfere in our life anymore. We just want to be away from Him, but then still, so all He can do is but of course still as a Father He still has affection and love for us, and so He all He can do is oversee, and if there is any opportunity where He, without us knowing, He can help us, He does. And so that's what the Lord does as the Super Soul. And and Prabhupada explains that thus the living entities are manifested in the creation in terms of respective inclinations inherent in them, and the requisite material bodies offered to each and every one of them by the material energy under direction of the Super Soul. So, because even we know at the time of death, conditioned souls, we have no idea where we go, what our next body is, or anything like that. But we still are full of material desires. And so according to those material desires and according to our deeds, whether pious or sinful, according to that, then we are awarded by material nature another material body. That can be any one in the 8.4 million species, and within human bodies, for example, it can be in many different circumstances. It's in a wealthy environment or in a very poor environment and all of that, or a beautiful body, intelligent, good intelligence, all of that. There's so many factors which can differ according. So when you look out in the material world, we see there's so much variety, even in terms of human beings, and everyone is different from one another, and that shows how it's very intricate actually, all like a combination of so many factors of from the desires that we develop specifically by the combination of the three modes in certain ways, how we associate with it and how we then act according to that, how pious, how sinful, and in terms of time, then at what time what different things are awarded. So it's impossible actually to understand for us as a conditioned soul how exactly it is happening and how what like what karmic reaction awaits us at what time and all of that. So this Krishna says also in Bhagavad Gita, to fully understand karma, it's not possible, forget it. Rather simply engage in devotional service and get free from karma. That's what he tells Arjuna. And and as Prabhupada points out here, that the body, it is offered by material nature, but under the direction of the Supersoul. So the Lord's touch and direction is always needed, even for the material life in that way. And then further, briefly he mentions about who is the, like when those. Sorry, just read that again. So, therefore, the material mind of the living entity develops when the Supersoul sits on his heart, after which the mind, the controlling deity, the moon, and the activities of the mind, namely thinking, feeling, and willing, all take place. So, in terms of, the mind is the demigod who is controlling, the controlling deity is the moon, Soma, and which is why, when there's like special times of the moon, full moon or something, that there's some people who are very sensitive to that and who react positively or negatively, whose minds then get completely out of control sometimes. And the activities of the mind, thinking, feeling, and willing, so all of that can only happen due to the presence of the Supersoul. And all of that, Prabhupada says, so the activities of the mind cannot begin without the manifestation of the heart, and the heart becomes manifested when the Lord wants to see the activities of the material creation. So, in other words, it is then at that point when the Lord in His universal form, as the understanding goes like that, before that it was one sense of that the other described, but now at this point it comes to where then he really wants to start to see action. And that's only possible by his presence as the Supersoul. And the other parts in the subtle material coverings in the heart, and such as the mind, intelligence, and false ego. And so, sorry, got some time left. So, and I read recently, and that shows so beautifully how a pure devotee sees, such as Srila Prabhupada, sees under even in the most difficult situations in material life, always has the transcendental vision. In other words, that someone like Prabhupada fully realized that the material world, as we know, so you've heard many times, is so constituted that it is full of difficulties of struggle. And so I'll just briefly read what Srila Prabhupada is saying in a purport in the 4th canto, chapter 7, text 47. So because when we read first that, and then we go back a bit about the history, like the history is about here, about with Daksha, how who had given his one of his 16 daughters, namely the youngest one, Sati, to Lord Shiva. So but he was very envious of Lord Shiva, and so there is whole pastime, which he might briefly explain later. But so first I want to go into, which is after what had happened between Lord Shiva and Daksha, to now where it came to the point here in the 7th chapter where they all were pacified again, and that even actually they restarted the sacrifice headed by Daksha, that even Lord Vishnu himself then personally did appear, and he, in his eight-handed form, and all the different, and it was a great sacrifice. Like, it was not a small thing. It was rather, there was all the great demigods, all the sages, the siddhas, the vidyadharas, all those different celestial beings were there, and so all of those different groups naturally offered their prayers to Lord Vishnu when he appeared. And so when the brahmanas who were there, when they offered prayers, then they, in one of the prayers, they said, like they concluded the prayer by saying to Lord Vishnu that we were awaiting your audience because we've been unable to perform the yajnas. And Srila Prabhupada explains there that because the brahmanas were always protected by Lord Vishnu, Shiva's followers could not do any harm to their prosecution of the sacrificial process. And now, having told that, those of who already know the story here from Srimad Bhagavatam, it might sound like really far out what Prabhupada is saying here, because if you know the history, like that, and then, but it sounds like completely opposite of what Prabhupada is saying here to what we had heard in those chapters before, about that Lord Shiva's followers couldn't do any harm to their prosecution of the sacrificial process. Because actually, we heard this was like a whole chapter, I think it's chapter 5, before, where it was described how Lord Shiva's followers actually did destroy the sacrifice there. And so what to speak of not being able to do any harm to the prosecution of the sacrificial process. And what to speak of, so what, maybe let's briefly go to the past time leading up to that. So what had happened? We know that Daksha, who was one of the sons of Lord Brahma, the great Prajapati, empowered to beget so many living entities, and very Daksha, we know the name means expert, so he was very expert in performing fruitive activities, and not a pure devotee, but rather for material purposes, to propagate the population and all of that. But he was very proud of his position actually. He was quite an exalted position. He had great respect from many of the celestial beings there, and one day when he performed, so I can't remember if it was a sacrifice, but when all the great demigods were assembled there, including Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, and when Daksha entered the assembly, everyone except Lord Brahma paid his respect to Daksha, but also because Lord Brahma is his father, obviously. I mean, he's the head or first living entity of the universe. But Lord Shiva also didn't stand up, because what was Lord Shiva doing? He was simply, as always, meditating on the Supreme Lord, and so Daksha, but he already was before envious actually of Lord Shiva. He only had given his daughter Sati to Lord Shiva on the advice of Lord Brahma, but actually he didn't have any desire to do that. And so when that happened, that he saw Lord Shiva not getting up and paying his respect, he got super upset, because his envy was very big, and then seeing that, then it fully blew up, and in the assembly he very impudently then blasphemed Lord Shiva, and but Lord Shiva, he's fully transcendentally absorbed, so he didn't mind. But there were some followers of Lord Shiva as well, such as Nandishvara, and this Nandishvara Um, then, upon hearing the blasphemy of Daksha, he then cursed all the brahmanas there assembled also, because they allowed Daksha to say that and didn't stop him or anything. So Nandishvara cursed the brahmanas there, and then Bhrigu heading the brahmanas there, he counter-cursed. And so as that was going on, then Lord Shiva, fearing that, now maybe, and because Bhrigu was, one of the things he said was about that you won't have any devotion to Lord Janardana. And so then Lord Shiva, fearing that, now Nandishvara, my follower, might even start to blaspheme Lord Janardana himself. So, and he better let me leave, so that they stop the cursing at least for now. So Lord Shiva just left. And but so after that, of course, Lord Shiva, he personally doesn't mind. So he was just continuing his business, but then one day his wife Sati saw in the sky flying all the different celestial beings, and very jubilantly, nicely decorated and all of that, and so she could understand that they were going for a great yajna that Daksha was to conduct, and so she had the desire to also go there. On the pretext that she wanted to see like the beautiful yajna, and especially her relatives, which she hadn't seen for a while, her mother and sisters, and so she pleaded like that to Lord Shiva. But actually, it's the Acharyas explain, or I think it's Bhagavatam itself, saying also that actually her main concern was that she was upset that Daksha hadn't invited Lord Shiva, and so she wanted to go there and straighten it up. But in any case, we know Lord Shiva, of course, he understood what's going on, and so he told her not to go, because he knew if she goes, then she will, actually already knew, then she would give up her body, because either she wouldn't be able to bear the being mistreated like that, neglected by her father Daksha, and and so in that way, but she was determined to do it, so she went by herself. By herself means still all the followers of Lord Shiva, they in order to please their master, they thought, she can't go alone, at least we should accompany her. So they, in great pomp, went with her, like even Lord Shiva's carrier Nandi went with them. And so as she comes then there, no one actually received her well, because they were all afraid of Daksha. And they knew his disposition, his envy of Lord Shiva. And so everyone except her mother and her sister stay very heartfelt, with heartfelt gestures. They did welcome her, but in fact, then you could see that actually she only cared about Lord Shiva being disrespected. She didn't even pay attention to them, even though they received her so nicely. All she was concerned about was that Daksha hadn't invited Lord Shiva, and that he performed the sacrifice there without putting or giving a share to Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva being one of the main demigods. In fact, we know he's the most powerful of all demigods. And so, she ended up then there actually chastising Daksha and using mystic yoga to leave her body in the presence of all there. And when the news came to Lord Shiva, then he became really angry and manifested by plucking out a hair, throwing it on the ground, manifested a huge powerful demon called Virabhadra, and ordered him to go there and kill Daksha. And so Virabhadra went there with other followers of Lord Shiva, and that's now what we come to. So they completely devastated the sacrificial arena there, or at least like really made a mess out of it. Like a few things down that I mentioned is that they destroyed the pillars, they even entered women's quarters, they entered the kitchen, through destroyed sacrificial pots, urinated on like the how do you say? I don't know the word now. How to they extinguished the sacrificial fire, and they even urinated around there and all those kind of things. So they really made a mess out of it, and Daksha, the head of the sacrifice, he eventually got killed by Virabhadra, and not only killed, but even he got beheaded by the very instrument that was meant to be used for the goat to be sacrificed at the yajna, and Virabhadra even threw his head into the sacrificial fire, offering as an oblation, and so that's what happened. And still, Srila Prabhupada is saying in this purport then, later here, that because the Brahmanas were always protected by Lord Vishnu, Shiva's followers could not do any harm to the prosecution of the sacrificial process. So, and that might sound really far out, but that shows, at least that's what, when I read that, that's what I came to my mind, is that it really shows the transcendental vision of Srila Prabhupada. Because the pastime goes on that okay, after all of that, then the demigods, and all those brahmanas and sages and so on, they approach Lord Brahma, as usual, when they're in trouble. And Lord Brahma, he tells them, well, what do you expect? If you offend a great personality like Lord Shiva, then there's no hope for any happiness or for any good. So we have to head to Lord Shiva and pacify him. And so he took all of them, they went to Kailas, and saw their Lord Shiva sitting under the huge banyan tree, surrounded by his associates like Kuvera, and also at that time present were the 4 Kumaras, Narad Muni, and actually it said he was there at that time, instructing Narad Muni about devotional service. And so, they all went there, and Lord Brahma offered prayers to Lord Shiva in a very submissive mood. Like actually it's described he praised Lord Shiva like in the mood of a Shaivite, as if Lord Shiva would be the Supreme Lord. Just because he was so afraid of knowing how powerful Lord Shiva and how angry he can become, because he is the predominating deity of the mode of ignorance, which is one of the main features is anger. And that's why we know he's responsible to destroy the whole universe when needed. And so he was quite anxious, Lord Brahma, and prayed very humbly to Lord Shiva and pacified him, and they requested him to please restore the devastation that was done to the different beings, like Brigamuni, for example. He was his moustache was removed, and teeth were knocked out from some others, and all of those kind of things, and many demigods were injured and so on. So, and Lord Shiva was pacified, but he still granted the request in a way that still all of those who did severe offense, that they would still remember the lesson. And then like Daksha, when he saw Lord Shiva, then he gave the life back to Daksha, but with the head of the goat, because his own head was burned in the sacrificial fire. But so when Daksha, when he saw Lord Shiva then being back to life, he first of all actually he was overwhelmed by feelings of sorrow for knowing that because of what he had done, that actually his own daughter Sati had given up her life. So first he couldn't even speak, but then when he was able to control himself, he did then pray to Lord Shiva, and then from that onwards, then the started their sacrifice, and then first they purified there are specific oblations they offer to purify the arena again, and then to get it ready, and then started the sacrifice, and then Lord Vishnu appeared, and then in many prayers of all those different beings, and that's where in this prayer then Srila Prabhupada is saying that. So, because his vision is that all the trouble that the Brahmanas and the others went through were actually, they were like inhibited and even greatly harassed actually. Like another thing I remember now is that when Lord Shiva's followers did their thing at the sacrificial arena, that like even stones were hailing like constantly, and like everyone, they were in such anxiety, just such harassment. But Srila Prabhupada says that they could not do any harm to the prosecution of the sacrificial process, which means his vision is that we have to expect so many difficulties in material life, even including in trying to perform sacrifice, trying to serve the Lord. But what matters is at the end of the day, if we are sincere, the Lord will enable us to be successful in our attempts, and He will be pleased, and we will be protected by the Lord. But on the way there can be so many troubles, and we have to expect that because we are in the material world. But a pure devotee like Srila Prabhupada knows, we shouldn't be disturbed by that. We should always see the ultimate result of being able to please the Lord. So just wanted to share that. Krantarachima Bhaktam Ke Cha, Srila Prabhupada Ke Cha.